Imagine this. A man with no legs, a war veteran who survived things most Americans only read about, rolls into a courtroom and learns for the first time that he owes $1,800 for 37 parking violations. The number hangs in the air like something impossible, and even Judge Caprio pauses, as if the page in his hand can't be real. The veteran moves forward on a worn-out wheelchair, one of those standard-issue hospital models insurance provides when there's no family to argue for better. The wheels squeak faintly. His jacket is frayed at the cuffs, but the military cap on his head is spotless, positioned with the kind of precision only discipline can teach. People in the courtroom turn, not out of pity, but out of respect for the quiet composure he carries with him, like an invisible uniform. As he settles near the microphone, a clerk at the side table leans toward a colleague and whispers, barely audible, "He shouldn't be here alone." No one answers. But that single line shifts the air. It suggests a story no paperwork can explain. Judge Caprio clears his throat and begins reading the list of violations. 37 citations, all issued at the same location, all for the same reason. No parking. Restricted zone. The judge's brows tighten. Something doesn't add up. It's too repetitive, too mechanical. He flips through the pages again, slower this time. The courtroom watches him read. He stops on one detail. "Sir," he says, lifting his gaze, "all of these notices were mailed to your previous address. You never received any of them?" The veteran shakes his head calmly, hands resting on the cold metal rims of his wheels. Caprio studies the file once more. He exhales, deep, surprised. According to the records, these violations were issued while you were hospitalized. The room stills. A woman in the second row presses her hand to her chest. Someone else shakes their head in disbelief. But the veteran's face doesn't change. No shock, no irritation, nothing. It's as if he expected those words. That unsettles the judge more than anything. "Did you know about this?" Caprio asks quietly. A long pause. The veteran doesn't nod. He doesn't deny it. He just looks at the judge with tired, steady eyes. Eyes that have seen too much, endured too much, and stopped expecting fairness a long time ago. And that's when the first real question forms. Not on paper, not in the law books, but in the minds of everyone in the room. If he knew, why didn't he act? And what kind of life does a man live when $1,800 in fines can gather unnoticed while the world assumes he's home, parking in the same forbidden spot? The answer isn't here yet, but every instinct in the courtroom says this is not a simple case of overdue tickets. It's something bigger, heavier, something that could happen to anyone when the system keeps moving, while a person lies forgotten in a hospital bed. And Judge Caprio leans back slightly, realizing this is the beginning of a story that will not leave the room unchanged. The judge folds his hands, studying the man before him with a steadiness that feels almost parental. "Tell me a little about yourself," he says, not as a formality, but as a doorway. The veteran hesitates, then speaks in a voice that sounds practiced from telling doctors the same facts for years. He served in Afghanistan. A roadside device destroyed the Humvee beneath him. The blast took both legs instantly. The rest of him was rebuilt slowly, inch by inch, in the Providence VA hospital. Months of metal bars, physical therapy, phantom pain that woke him at night. After discharge, he lived quietly on disability checks, not enough to rebuild a life, just enough to exist in one. But one detail stands out, unsettling in its simplicity. He never applied for any special parking privileges for disabled veterans. Judge Caprio tilts his head. Why not? The question hangs, and the veteran stares down at his hands on the wheels of his chair. "I didn't think I needed more than what I already had," he says softly. The courtroom senses something unspoken behind that answer, a reluctance rooted not in pride, but in fear of asking for anything ever again. The judge carefully returns to the citations. "Let's talk about these tickets. How did they start piling up?" The veteran takes a moment, as if choosing the least painful version of the truth. His old apartment building had been sold. New management took over, installing fresh metal signs, warning residents to park only with updated permits. The change happened while he was still in the hospital. When he came home, nothing looked different to him. Same building, same cracked sidewalk, same fading lines on the street. He parked where he always had, because it was the only spot close enough for him to reach his door without struggling. He didn't know the rules had changed, but then comes the detail that shifts the story from unfortunate to infuriating. The new property managers knew he was hospitalized. They had been notified. Yet the automated system continued generating violations every time the tires touched the curb. The judge's jaw tightens, a flash of indignation breaking through his composure. "Did you ever receive a phone call? A notice forwarded to you? Anything?" he asks. The veteran shakes his head. "I disconnected my phone while in rehab," he says. "I didn't want interruptions." The way he says it makes the room quiet again, not because of what he did, but what it reveals. A man retreating from the world, convinced that silence was easier than asking for help. Caprio leans forward slightly. "You were in that hospital for months. You must have felt very alone." The veteran doesn't answer. He doesn't need to. The truth is written in the stillness of his shoulders, in the way he avoids meeting anyone's eyes. He wasn't just recovering physically. He was hiding, shrinking his life to a single hospital bed so he wouldn't burden anyone with the weight he carried. The judge returns to the stack of violations on his desk. 37 tickets, all accumulating while the man they belonged to was fighting a different battle behind sterile white curtains. The silence in the courtroom grows heavier, more personal. People shift in their seats, confronted with a reality that feels too familiar in a country where veterans often slip through cracks no one admits are there. And as Caprio closes the folder, a new tension forms, quiet but unmistakable. The judge now understands the man's past, but something still doesn't fit. Something deeper lurks beneath the facts, the missing letters, the unreachable phone, the veteran's calm acceptance, the whisper earlier. He shouldn't be here alone. The judge senses it. This story has another layer waiting to surface. Judge Caprio flips back to the earliest pages in the file, scanning dates, times, officer notes. His expression sharpens. Something in the pattern bothers him. "Sir," he says slowly, "these records show warnings issued before your hospitalization. You continued parking in the same spot after receiving them. Why?" A low murmur passes across the room. Until now, the veteran seemed entirely unaware of everything. This is the first suggestion that there might be more to the story. The veteran's hands tighten on the wheels of his chair. He doesn't look defensive. He looks cornered, as if the question pulls him toward a memory he'd rather keep buried. Before he can answer, a voice calls out from the side wall. "Your Honor." It's one of the courthouse security officers, a man in his 50s, with the posture of someone who has seen too much in life. Caprio nods for him to speak. "I live on that street," the officer says. "The gentleman here, he wasn't driving that car." The statement hits the room like a dropped weight. Heads turn toward the veteran. Even he seems startled for a moment, not at the claim itself, but at the fact that someone finally said it out loud. Judge Caprio adjusts his glasses. "Are you certain?" "Yes, Your Honor. I've seen the vehicle parked there, but I've never seen him behind the wheel." Now the courtroom is fully awake. Until this moment, everyone assumed the violations were the result of a misunderstanding. Now it appears the misunderstanding might be about the driver, not the rules. Caprio leans forward. Sir, who had access to your vehicle? The veteran hesitates, long enough for the silence to grow uncomfortable. He finally speaks, voice strained. My younger brother. I gave him the keys before I went back into rehab. The words come out small, fragile, like he's admitting a failure. He said he'd keep it running from time to time, just to make sure it didn't fall apart. Caprio's expression shifts, not judgment, but deepening concern. And did he? The veteran swallows. I don't know. After a while, I couldn't reach him. The room goes quiet again, but this silence is different, heavier, tinged with an understanding older Americans know too well. Families torn apart, not by conflict, but by addiction, poverty, and shame. The judge's tone softens. Is your brother facing any difficulties? Another long pause. He struggles, the veteran says, with pills, with everything. The confession lands with a dull ache. It explains the secrecy, the avoidance, the missing details. It explains why the veteran avoided mentioning the past warnings, not to mislead the court, but to protect someone who had already vanished into his own chaos. Caprio exhales slowly, absorbing the new reality. So, the warnings likely went to him. The veteran nods once, barely. And the violations after you were admitted, he may have caused those too? I don't know what he did, the veteran whispers. But I didn't want to blame him. He's still my brother. This is the kind of truth that cracks a person open. Not dramatic, just heartbreakingly ordinary. A brother in trouble, a veteran trying to shield him. A silence that grew until it became 37 tickets and $18,400. The judge folds his hands again, this time more solemnly than before. Thank you for your honesty, he says, but his eyes drift to the citation timestamps. Something still doesn't align. Patterns don't match. Times of day differ from the brothers' known habits. Locations shift unpredictably. Caprio senses it in his bones. They haven't reached the real source of the problem yet. And the next step, the one he's about to take, may change the entire narrative. Judge Caprio signals to his assistant, who steps toward the monitor at the side of the courtroom. Pull up the parking camera footage for the earliest violations, Caprio requests. It takes a few moments, long enough for the anticipation to settle over the audience like a slow-moving fog. People lean forward. Even the veteran, who until now has barely reacted to anything, watches the screen as if bracing himself. The first video loads, a grainy nighttime shot. A man steps out of the veteran's car, hood pulled low, shoulders narrow, movements quick and restless. Caprio studies the frame. Is this your brother? The veteran shakes his head instantly. No, he's shorter and heavier. The judge gestures for the assistant to continue through the footage. Clip after clip rolls. Different days, different hours. And the same hooded figure keeps returning. Parking, leaving, returning again. Sometimes in the early morning. Sometimes just before midnight. None of it resembles a relative doing a favor. The rhythm is too irregular, too purposeful, too much like someone using a car that isn't theirs, because they believe no one will stop them. A ripple of unease passes through the room. Your Honor, the assistant says quietly, checking another system on a tablet. There's something else. She scrolls through a set of cross-referenced notes. That area has several flagged properties, reports of people living in abandoned apartments, and in vehicles. Caprio turns back to the veteran. When you left for your extended rehab program, where was your car? Same place as Alwa, the veteran says. I thought my brother still had it. When I got out, it was gone. I assumed he moved it somewhere else. I didn't ask questions. it is a heartbreaking admission. Simple, human, and painfully naive. "But you never reported it missing?" the judge asks. The veteran lowers his eyes. "No. If my brother used it wrong, I didn't want him arrested. I thought he'd eventually come home." The courtroom grows colder. This isn't a man avoiding responsibility. This is someone who chose loyalty over self-protection, and now the consequences have multiplied beyond recognition. "Let's check the plate scans," Caprio says. The assistant pulls up street logs. The car appears in areas known for temporary shelters, alleyways used by those with nowhere else to go, and lots where people leave vehicles unlocked, hoping someone will keep them running. It becomes unmistakably clear. Someone had taken advantage of a car that sat unattended for too long. Caprio watches the veteran closely, his face lined with sympathy, but also with the burden of truth he must deliver. "Sir," the judge says softly, "the person in these videos is not your brother, and the movement patterns of the vehicle don't match someone casually taking care of it. This looks like the car was being used by whoever found it." The veteran's breath catches, not in shock, but in realization. The pieces finally align, and the knowledge is almost painful. "All this time," he murmurs, "I was blaming the wrong person." His voice is thin, barely audible. Caprio leans forward. "You were trying to protect him." The veteran nods once. "And in doing so," the judge continues gently, "you protected the person who actually caused the harm." That sentence lands like a stone dropped in still water. No accusation. No contempt. Just the quiet truth of a man whose kindness left him exposed. The room absorbs it in silence. Then the judge closes the folder slowly, the soft thud of paper marking a shift in the direction of the entire case. They are no longer dealing with unpaid tickets. They are dealing with a man who has endured abandonment, misfortune, and misplaced trust. And Caprio realizes this story isn't about guilt at all. It's about what remains after someone has been let down by nearly everyone he relied on. Judge Caprio closes the folder, but doesn't look down at it again. Instead, he fixes his gaze on the veteran, studying him with a gentleness that comes from years of sitting across from people who carry more than they admit. "Help me understand something," Caprio says. "Why didn't you come forward when the first notices should have reached you? Why wait until this many tickets became this much debt?" The veteran exhales slowly, the sound uneven. "I didn't think anyone would believe me," he answers, "or care enough to look." The way he says it isn't bitter, it's hollow, as if that belief has shaped his life for years. The judge's expression tightens. This is not a man dodging responsibility. This is someone who simply assumed the world had no space left for him. Caprio leans back slightly, weighing his next question. "Do you know who finally reported your car abandoned?" The veteran frowns, genuinely puzzled. "No." Caprio glances at the clerk, who hands him a printout. He reads it briefly, then looks up. "It wasn't law enforcement," he says. "It wasn't building management. It was your neighbor, the woman who brings groceries to your doorstep on Sundays." The veteran blinks, stunned by the revelation. "She filed it?" "She did," Caprio confirms. "She said she hadn't seen you for weeks and was worried something had happened." The courtroom absorbs this. The narrative shifts again. Not a story of total isolation, but of someone who had a lifeline he never reached for. A middle-aged man in the gallery shakes his head in sympathy. Others glance at the veteran with a new understanding. He wasn't invisible. He had simply convinced himself he was. The judge places the paper aside and, for the first time today, allows emotion to enter his voice. "Son," he says quietly, "the world didn't forget you, but you built walls so high no one could see inside." The veteran's jaw tightens. He doesn't cry, but there's a shimmer in his eyes, a mixture of regret and discomfort, at being seen so clearly in a room full of strangers. Caprio continues, not scolding, but reflecting truths people of his generation carry like doctrine. This country moves fast, too fast. Folks look at screens more than they look at neighbors. People get lost between paychecks, appointments, and deadlines. And sometimes, the people who need help most are the ones who stay silent. A hush falls over the room. Even those who came for quick hearings now sit absolutely still. But, Caprio says, lifting a finger for emphasis, when a man serves his country, sacrifices what you've sacrificed, the burden on society isn't optional. It's a duty. We owe you attention. We owe you care. We owe you a system that sees you before the damage piles up. The veteran swallows hard. And right now, the judge continues, voice deepening. I want you to hear something you probably haven't heard in years. He leans forward, hands clasped. You didn't fail the system. A pause. The system failed you. The words land with the force of truth, long delayed. A woman in the gallery wipes her eyes. Someone breathes out sharply, as though the sentence struck something raw inside them. The veteran looks down, gripping the wheel rims with both hands, shoulders trembling. Not from fear, but from the weight lifting, the permission to stop blaming himself. Judge Caprio sits back, allowing the silence to settle. Not awkward. He gives it space, lets the moment do its work. Then quietly, he says, We're not at the ruling yet, but I want you to understand. Your story matters. And it's time someone stood beside you instead of watching from a distance. In that instant, something changes. The courtroom isn't a government building anymore. It becomes a place where a man, long forgotten by everyone including himself, finally feels seen. And everyone senses the decision approaching, one that will define not only the verdict, but what comes next for him as a human being. Judge Caprio straightens the papers before him, not to read them, but to signal that the moment has arrived. Sir, he says, his voice measured and steady. Based on the evidence, the discrepancies in the footage, and your circumstances, all 37 citations are dismissed. A soft gasp moves through the courtroom. Relief crosses the veteran's face, but only briefly, like a man who doesn't yet trust good news when it comes too suddenly. Caprio raises a hand before anyone can react further. But please remain after the session. I need to speak with you privately. The shift in tone is subtle but unmistakable. The room quiets. No one knows what the judge intends, and for a long beat, even the veteran seems unsure whether to feel gratitude or apprehension. The rest of the docket clears quickly. A few minor cases pass through routine motions. People slip out the doors, whispering about the veteran, the footage, the overturned fines. Yet many stay in their seats, compelled by something deeper than curiosity. They sense that what's happening now is no longer about violations or law. It's about a man who has lived too long in the shadows. When the last case concludes, Caprio gestures for the veteran to approach the bench. An officer gently helps him maneuver closer. The room feels hushed, almost sacred. Sir, Caprio begins, lowering his voice. When was the last time you spoke to your brother? The veteran hesitates, eyes fixed on the floor. A year ago, he murmurs. Maybe more. Caprio nods slowly, then reaches for a slim folder the clerk brought in earlier, one that wasn't part of the official case file. This arrived from social services this morning, he explains. I wasn't sure it was related until I heard your testimony. He opens the folder and turns it toward the veteran. They located your brother. He's in a rehabilitation center outside the city. The veteran's breath catches. He's alive? Caprio gives a small, reassuring nod. He asks that this be delivered to you. He slides a folded page across the bench. The veteran unfolds it with trembling hands. In uneven handwriting are 4 simple words. Tell him I'm sorry. The veteran closes his eyes, and for the first time during the entire hearing, emotion breaks through. The kind that doesn't spill into tears, but lives in the tightening of the jaw, the bowing of the head, the slow exhale filled with things unspoken. Caprio allows him the silence. Then, with unmistakable sincerity, he says, "You fought for your country. Now let your country fight for you." It's not theatrical. It's not polished. It's simply true. And it hits the veteran harder than the dismissal of the fines, harder than the letter in his hands, because no one has said anything like that to him in a very long time. He nods, barely managing a whisper. "Thank you, Your Honor." As he begins to wheel himself away, 2 courthouse employees exchange a quiet comment near the doorway. Words not meant for drama, but heavy with meaning. "He's finally getting help," one murmurs, "but it took 37 tickets to bring him here." The veteran moves down the aisle, slower than before, not because of his injuries, but because he's now carrying something fragile, a chance to begin again. And the courtroom watches him leave, knowing this hearing didn't just resolve a legal mistake, it brought a man back into the world.